So thank you so much for joining us for the webinar today, Language of Blessing in the Catholic Context. I'm really excited today. We have Joe Kavanaugh joining us from Omaha, Nebraska. So this is kind of fun that we can have a meeting and be so separate. And truly, you're our furthest speaker that we've had away, and it's really kind of nice. What time is it there, Joe?
We're just 1 hour behind you.
Oh, okay. I don't know why I thought it was like really, really far away and we were doing a few more hours, but 1 hour is not too bad.
Nope.
Well, we are glad to have Joe with us. Joe, a lot of us have met him through different things that we've done in the past. Joe is an excellent coach. He is a speaker. He is a leader in ministry. He is an entrepreneur. And he has so many other titles. I can't keep them all straight. But we are very glad that he's willing to share with us about the language of blessing. This talk in particular has been very helpful for me in the many different contexts of ministries I've been a part of. We've had Joe come and speak to our parents in confirmation class, particularly on this topic, plus also our parish pastoral council and also our staff. So this is something that really can be used for all different kind of contexts in our parish settings. So before we get started, can I start us in prayer? Good and gracious God, we thank you so much that we have the internet and that we can come together in this space to learn more about what you are calling us to as disciples. I pray that we would all hear what you intend for us to hear today, and that we would be able to take that and use it to transform our ministries wherever they are. I pray also that this would transform our families. As we learn to understand who we are, we could also understand who our parents, who our spouses, who our siblings and our children are, and who you intended them to be. Help us to use this language that we learn about today to build others up for your kingdom's cause. Bless our time together and bless this space each one of us are in. And we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, I'm going to ask that if you don't mind, you turn your speaker on mute so that we don't get any, what's the word? The back noise from anybody's computer or background, and we'll let Joe go. Joe is more than capable of taking your questions as they come. In fact, I'm pretty sure he will get energy from it. So if you have any questions while we're going through, please feel free to jump in, or if you'd like, you can write them down at the chat button down there, and either he will pick it up or I will pick it up. Am I forgetting anything, Joe?
Nope.
Okay.
Good.
All right, I'm going to share my screen so that he can do the PowerPoint, and we'll go from there. My screen is up.
Very good. Okay, and let's see, yep, I've lost control again. Might have to re-request.
Okay. There you go. Approved.
All right. Excellent. What I wanted to cover today, this is a very simplified PowerPoint because I really am looking forward to a dialogue. As Elizabeth was saying, I really like questions. I want to address what the participants want to address, but I'm going to present a couple concepts to get the ball rolling, and then we can build off of that. So I'm going to start out with a quote from Christi Fidelis Laici from Pope John Paul II, now St. John Paul II. And many of you are probably familiar with it. Okay, I'm not going forward here though. Okay. The controls are not working there. Elizabeth, you just want to go to the next slide? Can you do that?
Sure.
Okay. Yes. So this first concept he begins to introduce is, and this is from paragraph 28 from Christi Fidelis Laici. He says, being members of the church take nothing away from the fact that each Christian as an individual is unique and irrepeatable. And this is one of these interesting tensions, is that getting our heads around the fact that each of us are absolutely unique. No one like us has ever existed. No one like us will ever exist again. So, I like the fact that he introduced the concept of irrepeatability, that we cannot be repeated. Okay, that's how incredibly unique we are. He says, on the contrary, this belonging guarantees and fosters the profound sense of that uniqueness and irrepeatability, insofar as these very qualities are the source of the variety and richness for the whole church. Therefore, God calls each individual in Jesus Christ, each one personally. And this understanding is that each of us are created uniquely, called uniquely, to make a unique contribution, again, for what we'll see in the next slide, for the benefit of all. So let's take a look at that next slide. Okay, so above all, each member of the lay faithful should always be aware of being a member of the church, yet entrusted with a unique task. I mean, think about that. Each person is entrusted with a unique task that perfectly aligns with our unique design, and it can't be done by another, and which it is to be fulfilled for the good of all. So one of the concepts about this is that as we make that unique contribution, the whole benefits, the whole of the church benefits as we make the contribution. Flip of that is, if we do not make that contribution, the whole of the church suffers. The sad news is, far majority of people have no concept of their uniqueness or irrepeatability. And they also have no concept that they have a unique calling to make a unique contribution for the benefit of all. That is not the mindset of the majority of the members of the church. And that's across all denominations, not just Catholicism. Okay, now, one of the things as we think about this, why would that be true? If what is being stated here is true, and St. Paul in Romans and Corinthians and Ephesians gives us wonderful support to this concept of our uniqueness and our mutual interdependency with one another. Why is it that it's so rarely known? And one of the, I don't have this quote on a slide, but Dr. Conrad Barr, good Scandinavian, he was a psychiatrist, and he made an interesting observation. He said that the majority of the world's ills are caused by a severe deprivation of authentic affirmation for each individual. Okay, so each individual suffering from a severe deprivation of authentic affirmation. And as we think about that concept, first of all, I'm interested to see if maybe what your thoughts are on that, if we truly suffer from that, if that's something that is very widespread. He felt it was extremely widespread. And my experience, which we're going to be getting in a little bit when we look at the two cycles I'm going to introduce here, is that it is in fact a reality no matter what level a person is at in leadership, whether they're a pastor, whether they're a CEO, whether they're a manager, whatever they may be. It is amazing how ubiquitous this severe deprivation of authentic affirmation is. And we'll begin to kind of unpack that a little bit. But I'm curious, as I make that statement, any thoughts how true that statement is?
I'll chime in. I think it's definitely true. Thinking about all the past bosses I've had throughout my entire life. You know, working for people who are just critical and tell you all the things that you do wrong is a detriment to really being able to shine and be your best. On top of it, if no one tells you what you do good, you almost flounder just trying to please in any way, shape, or form that'll get you noticed. And that's not healthy either.
Great observation, Elizabeth. And, you know, one of the things, if we think about it, you know, if someone were to come to you and say, I have written a paper and I'm going to make a presentation on this, I would love for you to review it and let me know what you think. Okay, now, as you review that, what are you looking for? What do you think is going to jump out first to you? And what research shows is what's going to jump out to you is any grammatical errors, any run-on sentences, things of that nature. But the point is, you're looking for what's wrong rather than looking for what's right about that. And so when you get back with that person, odds are you're going to point out all the different things that you found that are wrong or incorrect and that need to be corrected. Does that make sense? It's a human default for us that we look for the thing that's not quite right rather than looking for affirmation. Pat, you have a question.
Yeah, Joe. So Joe, you and I talk a lot about how you have probably in the last 2 or 3 years coached what, maybe 50, 60, 70 Roman Catholic priests?
Mm-hmm. This would be true.
And tell the folks what you continually tell me after the more and more you dive into this in terms of the structure that they're immersed in.
It's definitely a structure that is looking for what they're doing wrong. There is very little affirmation. There's virtually no celebration of their unique gifts, talents. The emphasis tends to be know your theology, know your doctrine, get everything exactly right. But what I find is so many of them begin to lose their very sense of identity to the role, to their responsibilities, which can be even overwhelming. So,
and what kind
building
of
confidence.
So let me follow up. So how are you seeing, like I just know that the priests that I referred to you some of them have had absolutely transformational experiences, Joe, over a period of months when you've poured into them. So what does that, like, help us understand how that unfolds in your context when you work with you guys?
Okay. So what I find is the far majority of priests, but also I coach other pastors as well. And what I find is what is true for most pastors, they are in a state of severe deprivation of authentic affirmation. And again, the key thing here is, you know, it's not that we never receive an affirmation. We do when we do what others want us to do. What we don't receive is the affirmation for who we are. We don't receive the affirmation for our unique gifts, our unique talents. That's what we're not receiving. And I'm going to actually give a title to that phenomena when we look at a couple slides here. So what happens is the process that we begin to take the priest through to identify their unique set of strengths, to identify their unique motivations, to identify their giftedness is all based on appreciative coaching and affirmation of who they are authentically. And all of us, one aspect of our mutual interdependence is we need to be affirmed by one another. And unfortunately, what we tend to receive from one another is more criticism than affirmation. Okay, well, let's take a look at this next slide. So again, I asked the question, what prevents people from knowing their unique contribution? Well, that's exactly what we've been talking about, is most people are in a severe state of deprivation of authentic affirmation of who they are as a unique human being. They're in deprivation of being affirmed for their talent, for their intelligences, for their giftedness. The amazing thing I find is when we receive affirmation, I have seen situations where, let's say, a young person, 12, 13, someone who they respect comes alongside of them and gives them one deeply meaningful affirmation, and it changes the course of that person's life. I mean, that's how powerful affirmation is. And again, the key operative is when it's authentic. We're not talking about just throwing out compliments, general compliments, that type of thing, but rather affirmations from observing who this person is, what is unique about this person, what we appreciate about that person. And one of the things I've shared before is, it's amazing, we actually have a lot of positive thoughts about other people, but we just don't verbalize it. And that is a tragedy, because it's the verbalization of the affirmation that has its impact. Having good thoughts toward people doesn't really impact them. They need to hear it. All right, let's take a look at this next slide then. So a couple observations. Let's go to the clicker. So most people's primary motivations are fear-based. So for example, fear of failure is a big motivator. Fear of loss, big motivator. Fear of what others think. Some people are constantly thinking about this. And if you think about fear as a motivator, it is so stressful to be motivated by fear in the workplace, within families, in our communities. But my experience has been that's actually the primary motivator for most people that I work with. Okay. So the other thing, as a result of this, most people minimize their past successes. I actually hear people say, well, I'm not recalling that so much because anyone could have done that. Okay. That's not only minimization of your past success, that's minimization of your gifts, your talents, and your unique intelligences. Okay. But people do it. They minimize it, but they emphasize their past mistakes and failures because that's what they've been hearing all their life. Right? That's what they hear from their teachers. That's what they hear from their parents. That's what they hear, from so many, their bosses. And so it's completely reversed from what it should be. But as a result of that, people don't even recall. With MCORE, we ask people to tell 3 stories of past accomplishments that are deeply meaningful to them. And I cannot tell you how many people I've worked with where I just get the deer in the headlight look. And I'm going, okay, I'm just looking for 3. And they will literally say, I can't even think of one. So it's not that they've not had accomplishments, even deeply meaningful accomplishments, but there's such a tendency to minimize that. And again, focus on failures and weakness and things of that nature. Okay, one more. So what this then does, it produces anxiety and stress that actually limits our ability to function mentally, physically, and spiritually. Okay, so stress, which is caused by a neurotransmitter called cortisol, actually minimizes our talent, our intelligence. It actually shuts down our prefrontal cortex. And so when people are under stress, they are not optimizing, they're not functioning in their greatest talents, gifts, and intelligence. All right, next one. So an experience I had, which I learned about what I'm going to be talking about, these 2 cycles, is I was the founder and director of a Christ-centered 12-step program for people in relational crisis. Okay, you know, click the next one. So that was in 1989. Okay, next. Now I was looking for 9 people. I just wanted one small group to be able to go through this. And the very first night, 28 people showed up, which I thought was overwhelming. And I don't have this on the slide, but then I thought we would get down to those 9, but over the next 90 days, the group grew to over 150 people. Over the next 10 years, over 7,000 individuals began to go through that process. And that's how I discovered the reinforcing cycle of false identity. Okay. And I discovered it was generational. There were people where we could actually dialogue about this and discover it had gone back at least 4 generations. All right, so let's take a look at that then. Go ahead and click the next one. All right, so this is your heart. This is an individual's heart. And what we're going to be looking at are things that happen to us externally. So let's click the first one there, Elizabeth. So our parents, bless their hearts, well-meaning, but were not self-aware. That was just, you know, for most of us, just something that wasn't a focus for people. And there was a belief that human beings are all pretty much alike. We're all pretty much the same. And again, we could even use Maslow's hierarchy of needs. See, we have these universal needs, so we're all pretty much alike, but we're not. We're nothing alike, actually. We're incredibly unique. But they're not aware of that. Okay, so click next one there, Elizabeth. So they minimize their uniqueness. They minimize their experience, their intelligence, their past accomplishments. They minimize all that. That is just human nature to minimize that. Next one. And so then they get it caught into this phenomena called projection. So it's basically kind of works like this. Hey, I'm an adult. I've had experience. You haven't. I know what works for me. It will work for you. And therefore they project their unique set of strengths, intelligence, experiences, and past accomplishments onto the children and say, if you'll just do what I do, you're going to be good. Making sense? Mm-hmm. All right, next one. They then set up unfounded expectations. So I'll give you a real quick example. My number 2 strength finders is input. I'm also high on learner. I have been a lifelong voracious reader. My wife was an English history teacher, and we teamed up on our projection. And we projected, we have 5 sons, and we projected on our sons that reading was essential and that you should be reading every single day, and you should be reading actually multiple books at a time and things of that nature. We projected, and we actually drove our boys away from reading. But we, you know, if they showed any interest, like let's say baseball, we bought them books on baseball. If they showed interest in going fishing, we bought fishing books. I mean, anything we could do, we projected. And again, it did not have a good outcome. Okay, next one. So then, of course, we judged. And our judging was, well, you would love reading if you just try harder. You know, you're being rebellious, you're just not trying hard. And of course, we then discovered that later on, once they all took strength finders, that none of them have input in their top 10 even. And that would help explain why that was driving them crazy. But we judged, and we even labeled. And I said something which I did apologize for later on, but and deeply regret I said it, but I actually made the statement, if you do not form a love of reading, you're never going to amount to anything meaningful. And that's not a blessing, that's a curse. And felt horrible once I began to put 2 and 2 together and realize this. But so that's an example of judging. Next one. And so then we label. You're lazy, you're unmotivated, you know, whatever labels we want to come up with. Now, this cycle, what this does to a child is in their heart of hearts, it begins to produce some very specific outcomes. So next one there. So they become fear and shame based. So I talked, most people are fear motivated. Most people are fear based. It's because of this cycle that they are. Okay, next one. So anxious presence. You know, when you are motivated by fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of what other people think, it creates an anxiety. When you come into a new social situation, things like that, there's a certain anxious presence. Many children, they go into a new classroom, they have this anxious presence. Next one. Their identity becomes performance-based. So, well, if I do good in school, if I get good grades, then, you know, then I'm going to have value. Then my identity will be more positive. Or if I excel in sports, or some get caught up with appearance, different things like that. But their identity comes from what they do rather than who they are. So it's doing based rather than being based. Right? And so it's all about doing and having. So if I can accumulate things, if I can drive a nice car, I can have a big house, if I can dress nice, things of that nature, that's supposed to give us a sense of value. Of course, what we all have learned as adults is that's not true. We can go out, we can spend money, we can buy a new car, but within a week or so, the excitement of that kind of fades away, and it really doesn't change our identity at all in any significant way. Okay, next one. So what I've noticed is produces then in people is this scarcity mentality, and there's a lack of generosity with people who have this fear-based approach. And they tend to be kind of greedy, they tend to accumulate, they tend to kind of, you know, they want to hoard things to themselves, and they're rather miserly. And then the last one, their whole focus then becomes inward. So it creates a deep self-consciousness. Okay. So an observation here is what these individuals have been subjected to is extrinsically controlled motivation. Okay. So the cycle of false identity is an outcome of extrinsic controlled motivation that uses pressure, coercion, and seduction to motivate. So even like promising, if you do this, I'll give you this, is actually extrinsically controlled motivation. Okay. All right. So cycle of authentic identity. So this is what creates and that's also the cycle of false identity is called a fixed mindset. This will create a growth mindset. So authentic identity, where does it begin? Well, now this has to become intrinsic. So as we grow in authentic self-awareness, that's the foundation. We have to begin to discover who has God uniquely created me to be. All right. Now, a lot of people have said, I actually received this criticism in the beginning of this. They're saying, you're going to make everyone conceited and self-centered. And my observation was it was exactly the opposite. As people discovered who God had uniquely created and called them to be, their response was a deep and profound sense of gratitude, knowing they don't deserve it, they didn't earn it, but God has generously and lavishly poured out gifts and talents and blessing on us. And they learned how to really receive that and own that and be deeply grateful in the process. So that actually produces a deep and profound and authentic humility. Again, knowing I didn't earn this, I didn't deserve this. It's a privilege to have received these gifts and be able to offer them to the benefit of others. Okay, and we finally begin to function authentically. We're not trying to be anybody else. We're not trying to be someone else. We're happy and content to be who we've been uniquely created and called to be. And so we now function with authenticity. And now we're no longer inward. We're able to now express and really appreciate the uniqueness of others and to really love them for who they are, truly and authentically. And finally, as Jesus commanded of us, our light truly begins to shine. So out of that authenticity, out of that love, who we are and who God has created us, we are literally a reflection of God's glory when we function authentically according to how we've been created and uniquely designed and called to be. Now, what this produces in our heart is we begin to receive God's perfect love. And of course, we know that according to the Apostle John, that God's perfect love drives out all fear. So we begin to receive that. We now can function in non-anxious presence. We're no longer self-conscious. We take ourselves with certainly a degree of humor. We can be mindful and fully present for others and to be able to observe others. Our focus is serving others. We now understand the joy. There is no greater joy really than that privilege of serving others. We are experiencing that now. Okay, our focus is always outward. And we're operating out of an abundance mentality, and there's a new sense of generosity and sharing that we've never experienced before. Okay, so the key here is this is functioning out of what I call an intrinsic autonomous motivation. So it's an outcome of intrinsic motivation that uses our volitional choice, endorsement of behavior, interests, deeply hid values and beliefs. In other words, we're being affirmed, we're being built up, we're seeing the value of how God has uniquely created us. We're understanding that every human being is amazingly talented, amazingly motivated, and amazingly gifted. And it's intrinsic to us. God has placed it within us. And that's why it's intrinsic autonomous motivation. Okay, so those are some of the key principles, which I hope will kind of create a dialogue now that we can begin to have. So open it up here for some questions, some observations, whatever you're feeling at this time.
I'll start.
Okay.
I guess I'm looking to see what is your advice on how we can truly give authentic affirmation to people. What are we looking for? How do we know that we're giving them what they need rather than projecting what we think?
Mm-hmm. So what's interesting is this ability to authentically affirm others actually flows out of us understanding who we are. The fact that we have come to accept our strengths, our gifts, our intrinsic motivations, and equally important, we have deeply accepted our weaknesses, who we're not, what we don't do well. And what I find is that until we've been affirmed in our strengths, we don't accept our weaknesses. Now, what's interesting about accepting our weaknesses is the fact that all of a sudden we begin to deeply appreciate that other people are really gifted where we're not. And to me, that really begins to jump out, is that, wow, you are so good. For an example, Elizabeth, you are administratively gifted. And that's something I have deeply come to appreciate because I am not. I tend to be more creative and I love writing and presenting and things of that nature. But when it comes to detail, that type of thing, that's not going to be my forte. And I've come to so deeply appreciate that in others. But so to me, that's kind of the beginning of it, is understand our strengths, understand who we're not. And that begins to then create that awareness of, wow, you are really good at that. And being able to articulate that and express our appreciation for what other people begin to contribute. But it's I know it seems a little counterintuitive, but it's not until we understand who we are and who we're not that we're really then become much more gifted at affirmation and building up of others.
I want to comment. You know, Joe, it's interesting. I see Gary Roney. Is Gary on this call? So Gary and I were together in that May 2016 MCOR training where we learned about you through Josh. And then I wound up, that was May 16th. I remember the day, 2016, so three years ago. But I remember he told us about you, and then I bought your book. And that's when I reached out to you and asked you to coach me. And I haven't really I'm sorry, I haven't picked up this book since then. It's been 3 years.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I went when you were putting up the heart, I went back and I found it in the book. So false identity is page 74, and authentic identity in your book is page
164.
164, exactly. And I'm like, how did I miss this? How have I not been telling people about this the last 3 years? But you know, they say, now I have language for what I see when we work with leaders, especially because now we're working with more and more leaders across the country. These are high capacity leaders.
Yep.
And I can see how if we don't do good identity formation, human formation, Josh Miller calls it personal vocation, whatever language you use, I'm seeing leadership fail again and again because of this cycle of false identity.
Yes.
That is so embedded into the culture. And because it's embedded in the culture, it's become embedded in the church.
Absolutely. And fear-based leaders struggle greatly in trying to affirm others. You know, you cannot give to others what you have not received yourself. It's a profound principle. And as you know, what we've experienced, so many of these leaders have not been affirmed. And there's that deprivation of affirmation for them. And so it's, you know, the old adage is hurt people hurt people. And it's, you know, people who are in deprivation of affirmation are not able to affirm others.
You know, Joe, not only have we not affirmed them, but we've actually malformed them because, you know, I have a background in business. I have an MBA, a CPA, and I'm familiar with all of the, not all of them, but many of the leadership models that have come out of corporate America where we've objectified persons and put them into objects on spreadsheets. And sadly, the church has adopted a lot of this leadership vision that comes from the world. And that's one of the reasons we're so dysfunctional as a church.
Yeah, it should have been exactly the opposite. Is the church should have been informing the corporate world. And now that's actually, you know, I mean, the corporate world is now beginning to discover some of these actually deeply spiritual based concepts that are transformative and actually increase performance. What a deal.
Joe, give us examples of where you're seeing, like you and I have talked about Lencioni. Give us examples of where you're seeing corporate America really lean into biblical principles, but with secular language or secular framework.
So week before last, I was at the Gallup conference, their annual summit. And again, what they are finding with all their research, you know, is that the hierarchical, power-based type leadership is a train wreck today. It is driving away talent. Again, what they've discovered is, you know, millennials are changing things, and it's interesting. I know there's some faith struggles with a lot of millennials, but in the heart of heart, the thing that really jumps out, and they were talking about this as well, is millennials want to be known authentically. Millennials want to have an opportunity for growth and development. And so what Gallup is really seeing is that, first and foremost, a leader's responsibility, their first responsibility, is the development of the people they lead. Now think about, that's biblical, from the standpoint that, but again, what we know is this doesn't happen because, again, you can't pass on what you haven't received. But when Jesus talked to his team and said, do not lead as the world leads. Do not lord it over them, but rather have a servant's heart. Well, that's what I was hearing at the Gallup Summit. Leaders must have a servant heart to those they lead. The issue is, how are you going to give these people opportunities for development and growth? That's your first responsibility as a leader. Grow the people that you're responsible for. And of course, with Gallup, they're going to go into much more detail about how each individual is unique, how they're motivated uniquely, all the different aspects. Like, you really have to get to know your people, and you have to care about them. One of the I know you're aware of this, but Gallup found there are 4 universal needs for all leaders, for their followers. Number 1 is trust. But the trust has to be a duality trust. The leader has to be trusted, but the leader also has to trust those they lead. Mm-hmm. If the followers sense you don't trust them, they're not going to trust you. And everything begins with trust. Number 2, interestingly enough, is care and compassion. That people you lead need to know you care about them as a human being, that you know them, and that you care about them and you value them. They have to have that sense. If they don't think you care about them as a human being, they're not going to trust you. So the whole thing collapses again. Then number 3 is stability, that you're a person of core values. You are boringly predictable in that you don't compromise. You have these very, very clear standards and core values. And then the last one is hope, that every time they meet with you, they are more hopeful about themselves, about their team, and about the organization. Okay, that's from the corporate world. And when you look at that, all 4 of those things have to be reflected by any faith-based leader. Any pastor has to embody those 4 things as well. And of course, that's one of the challenges, because we see, again, cross-denominational, many pastors don't trust the laity. Matter of fact, they get intimidated by strong leadership among the laity oftentimes. I'm not saying all do, but that can be a real issue.
It's interesting, Joe. I was thinking earlier when you were talking about, this issue now, like multi-generational, which I know people in formalized church roles talk about this all the time, like the challenge from a faith formation standpoint now, because it's like there's a multi-generational need that there isn't necessarily a desire, for it. And then also kind of like how this stuff builds across generations, like if a child's parent, didn't have this, how do we help children whose parents have these needs but don't know it, and they keep doing this false identity reinforcement loop? And maybe perhaps in the corporate world now, this is coming to bear because a large portion of this generation didn't receive this kind of development, from their parents. Right. And so now they're looking for it from the leadership in the organizations that they support. I'm curious on your thoughts about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had an issue for some time. I know, starting with boomers, one of the things I discovered was boomers were kind of a fatherless generation. Their parents were in World War II. They were hard workers, but a lot of them really didn't have the kind of relationship with their parents that they desired. And then boomers went on to be not the greatest parents, because again, it's very difficult to give what you've not received. And so one of the things that I've heard from a lot of corporate executives is the need to reparent their employees, that there's a lack of quality parenting in our society. And one of the things that jumps out to me on that is, again, it's just another way of looking at the lack of authentic affirmation. Because as parents, and Karen, you and I have talked about this before, but that the desire to affirm our children, to build up our children, to discover their uniqueness, their gifts, their talents, their motivations, that's something you do think about and express. But the reality is the far majority of people have not received that from their parents. So there's this back to this deep need to be known, to be valued, to be appreciated. If we think about it, any one of us, if we, for example, let's just think if something like you go and you do a presentation to a group of people, wherever it may be, whether it's at church, whether it's community, whether it's at work, how much do you want to hear? How did you do? How much do you want to receive affirmation for what you just did? And my point is this affirmation is not something that ever goes away, the need for it. We are created, it's part of our mutual interdependency. We are created in such a way where we need that affirmation from one another. In general, we're in severe deprivation for it. It's just not being done in most environments.
How can we on a larger scale kind of help impact like the culture of the communities we're in, be it our parishes or, in terms of helping to cultivate a culture of this affirmation?
I think be people of affirmation, right? Is number one, we have our first responsibility is to be faithful to who we are, have been uniquely created and called to be. And so we want to be authentic. We want to function out of a non-anxious presence with people. And so it's important for us to continue to receive that, right? Whether that's through mentors, whether that's through discipleship, whatever that may be, whether it's through coaching. But that's something that we will never outgrow either. I was watching the U.S. Open yesterday, and again, I'm very mindful of the fact that every one of those individuals who are phenomenal professionals, at world-class levels, they still have coaches, right?
Yeah.
We never really fully outgrow that. So, I think fulfilling our own potential, embracing that responsibility and growing it and modeling that is one aspect. But out of the overflow of that, then comes our ability to celebrate and to affirm others. I mean, my entire role is almost exclusively dedicated to the affirmation of others. That's what
Joe,
I do.
I have a question I want to ask. Actually, this is also for Elizabeth too. So now we're 3 years into this, and I think that between our the coaching that Human Formation has done and those we trained, you and others have trained over 100 coaches through this organization. So I'm getting feedback all over the country. Now we're coaching people in the UK. But one of the things that I see again and again is the need, when there's this false identity, the need for people, because we're all Christian on this call, to be set free.
Yes.
And Elizabeth, if you could pull up the 4 pillars and scroll down to what I'm seeing, 3 years in, is how so many people need to be set free.
Yeah.
In this false identity. And what we're seeing, and I think Elizabeth and I talk about this occasionally, and I talk about it with some other people that are involved in the Unbound ministry.
Yeah, Unbound.
You know, Joe, one of the priests you coach, I won't say his name, but is very involved in Unbound. So stop right above Father Mallon there. So when you look at the 4 pillars, this integrated formation, this holistic formation, that what we do is so focused on the human piece, appreciative inquiry. But what I'm seeing again and again is that we need to provide some of these people with the opportunity to be set free. You know, the 5th key in Unbound, a lot of you were involved with the Unbound ministry. It's become very big in Pittsburgh, is the Father's blessing. And there's just such integration between this appreciative inquiry, human formation coaching, and the need for people to be set free from all of that false identity and all that garbage they've been fed all their lives about their identity as sons and daughters of the Lord. Elizabeth, you and I have talked about this. If you want to share, because you've done Unbound ministry.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest things that that I've experienced in particular with the coaching that I've been through is truly understanding who God has made me to be. And with that, everything has grown inside of me. My abilities, understanding that they come from God, and understanding that I don't have to listen to the voices telling me that I'm doing something wrong or that I shouldn't be doing something, that all of the strengths that God has given me, they burst forth. I can't keep my mouth shut. And then when I leave, you know, the devil's telling me, why did you open your mouth, Elizabeth? And so that battle is being shut down on a daily basis because of the growth I've experienced and the freedom I have of being who God has made me to be. And I don't have to listen to anybody else or have to try to gain somebody else's approval or anything, because truly I'm just trying to figure out how to grow into who God has called me to be. It's a beautiful transformation, I think so, and I've been able to be a part of it with so many people through coaching as they gain understanding who God is calling them to be, and integrating the spiritual just seems like a natural part of the coaching process, because we're called to grow in all of these ways. I don't know, that's what you were looking for, Pat, for me to share. Okay. All right. Having a boss, I'll add too, having a boss who allows you to grow and unleashes you is really essential to that. Being surrounded by teams who have the same language, you know, is ideal as well. So just being able to be placed with other people around you who are going through these same things and who are growing too, it really helps in that development process. So it's not something that I suggest that anybody does on their own, because when you're experiencing the growth from it, you know, other people around you really can see that in you and want to know what's going on, and it's easy to tell them, this is what we're doing, and you know, jump on board, because there's only joy and hope and unleashing that is ahead of us. Nothing, you know, there's nothing bad that comes with it.
You know, and just so if anyone's thinking this, you know, it's not exclusively affirmation. The reality is, when we're working with people who we know love us, understand us, appreciate who we are, we can also receive, you know, correction, guidance, that aspect. You know, that's again, back just to the professionals for a moment. That coach is not only saying, you did this great, but never mentions what they did wrong, right? But because we know these people deeply care about us, because we've received consistent affirmation, we're also open to correction as well, where we can be better, where we can grow even more. So there really is a balance, but it's not a 50-50. You know, affirmation needs to be, you know, about 80-90%, you know, and then there's that correction. But it's, you know, one of the things we're learning through neuroplasticity research is that's actually how our brain is designed to function, is you optimize through 80–90% affirmation with about 10% or so correction. Is that making sense? Because again, the focus is on what you do well, where the strengths are. We know that there's always opportunity for further growth, you know, and adjustment and that type of thing. But the old model of leadership has been so focused on the deviation or what needs to be corrected or that type of thing. Gallup and others survey companies have actually done analysis of annual reviews and found that 70 to 90% of the content of an annual review is negative, which is why everyone absolutely hates them, including the manager. And it really needs to be flipped, you know, where so much of it is what you accomplished, what you did well, what are your new goals, you know, looking at what are areas where you'd like to grow, where you need further development, positive, 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 and then, okay, here's a couple things that probably need to address that might make, you know, enhance your overall contribution.
Well, I think we're about at our hour here. Joe, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave us with? Something tangible that we could kind of take with us that might be helpful as we leave this space?
Well, I think it's one of the most self-responsible things we can do is think about who are those people that bring out our best?
Mm.
Who are those people that we know care about us? And spend more time with those people. You know, I mean, seriously. And also then for ourselves, this, because I have to keep remind myself about this. When we're thinking positive thoughts about other people, verbalize it. Take the opportunity to verbalize it. And the fact that most people, it's so rare that they receive affirmation. What I find is the majority of people don't know how to receive an affirmation. They'll minimize it. They not even reject it. Don't let that stop you. Just be able to say, I mean this sincerely, and I really do appreciate and value who you are and what you contribute.
Excellent, excellent. Anyone else want to say anything before we head out?
Joe, I just want to say one final thing. Joe, thank you for what you have done. Several people on this call you've trained, you've coached, many, many more, and you have had a massive impact in Pittsburgh and now beyond Pittsburgh. We see Sister Dorsey from Ann Arbor, and now you're doing work all over the place in the Catholic space. So you always were, but now it's accelerated. So thank you for your yes.
It has been a privilege and an honor, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it and continue to.
Great, thanks.
Thank you again, Joe, for sharing with us. I really I appreciate the ideas of just being open and articulating whenever you have something good to share with everyone. I appreciate your ability to present in a clear and concise way and to give me something to take with me when I leave the space. So thank you for all the learning you've done throughout your entire life that brought us to this point that we can take all these things with us. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. I hope that you have learned something, that you can point others to Joe's books, you can point others to some of these things that he's mentioned today, that you can take it not only into your workplace, but also to your families as well. I think that's important, remembering our families and affirming them who God is creating them to be as well. Truly, we need to be doing that more often. Please join us next month. Next month we have the how. We're talking about integrating assessments to find personal identity, and that's going to be with Momika Garish. July 25th. That email has gone out, and we're working on a August 22nd with Sharon Hackman. And we're going to be talking about biblical leadership. So really giving us a foundation for the things that we're doing and that we've been talking about. I'm really excited about this summer series that we have going on. I think there'll be more tangible things that we can take with us and that we can each grow from these webinars. If you weren't able to join us, we hope, or you know somebody that wasn't able to join us, you can give them the link later, pass it on so that others can hear what we're learning about. And any questions, make sure you email us. I know you guys get Sharon Bogus's emails. Let her know if you need anything or you want to hear a topic that we haven't touched on yet. We appreciate everything. Joe, Pat, thanks for everything, for all those who are with us. Can I pray us out? Good and gracious God, we thank you for the language of blessing that Joe has been talking about. We thank you for the affirmations that people have given us that have been authentic, that has helped us to grow and to be who you're calling us to be. We ask that you would send your Holy Spirit upon each one of us as we leave this space, that you would help us to know and you would nudge us when we are supposed to affirm others. Lord God, help us to be more aware so that others may find you in our hearts and in our faces, that others would find you in the places that they go, and that most importantly, they would find you in the strengths that you have given them. Thank you for making us each unique, for knowing each strand of hair on our head, and for calling us each to a purpose that is authentic. Help us to grow with each step that we take, dear Lord, and bless us as we move from this space. We pray all these things in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, everybody.